They laughed the moment I walked in. The sound was not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the silence of the courtroom. It echoed against the marble walls, bouncing off my memories like tiny knives. I remember the judge glancing up, annoyed, but the laughter stayed in my ears long after the room went quiet. I had spent 40 years mastering these floors, defending clients who once shook the nation. Now I stood here alone, accused of the very crime I had warned others against, fraud. They said I forged documents. They said my mind was slipping. They said I was too old to handle complex cases anymore. And the cruelest part, those words came from people I had trained myself. As the prosecutor adjusted his tie, I saw my reflection on the polished table. Wrinkles, tired eyes, but behind them, a fire that age could not smother. When you lose everything, something strange happens. Fear dies before you do. The first piece of evidence slid across the desk, my signature, copied perfectly, except I had never signed that page. I could have shouted, I could have begged. Instead I smiled, because in that forged line, I saw the hand of the real culprit, my own protégé, the one who had once called me a legend. Her name was Emily. Young, brilliant, ruthless in ways I never was. I had mentored her, believed in her, even handed her my biggest client when my health began to fail. She called me ma'am, with such charm that I forgot ambition sometimes wears politeness as perfume. But ambition has no loyalty. When the laughter rose again, soft, polite, poisonous, I realized something. They were not laughing at the case. They were laughing at what age does to a person. They believed time had already buried me. They forgot that I helped build the coffin. The judge asked if I wanted to speak. My lawyer leaned forward, whispering that silence was wiser. But wisdom is useless when your dignity is on trial. I stood and faced them all. The jury, the smirking faces of my former colleagues, Emily sitting with the prosecution, pretending indifference. I will not defend my past, I said calmly. It speaks for itself. But I will expose every lie that crawled into this courtroom pretending to be truth. A murmur moved through the crowd. The judge tapped the gavel, but I could see something shift. Doubt. Doubt is more powerful than any witness. That night I sat alone in my apartment. Old case files surrounded me like ghosts of battles won and lost. Every folder held memories of victories that once meant everything. Now each file whispered the same question: how did it all go wrong? I poured myself a cup of cold coffee and began to trace back every detail. The contracts, the signatures, the transfers. And then I saw it, the pattern no one else had noticed. A missing stamp on one page, a mismatched date on another. Small errors invisible to younger eyes, but I had lived my life spotting them. Someone had framed me with precision. Someone who knew my habits, my shortcuts, my trust. Only one person fit that description. The next morning, I walked into my old firm unannounced. The receptionist froze. No one expected to see me again after the public humiliation. But I had come not to beg, to observe. I watched Emily giving orders from my old office. She wore confidence like armor. Her laughter filled the corridor. The same laughter from the courtroom. Every intern stared at her with the admiration I once earned. She caught sight of me and froze for a heartbeat, then smiled as if seeing a ghost. "Come to say goodbye?" she asked. "Not yet," I replied. "I came to see how much dust settles when truth is buried." She laughed again. "You should retire before you embarrass yourself further." I leaned closer. "I already have been embarrassed. That part is over. Now it is your turn." Her smile faltered. For the first time I saw fear flicker in her eyes. It was brief but real. And that was enough to feed my will. As I walked out, a younger associate whispered, "She is finished." I turned back and said, "Do not mistake silence for defeat. I built this place on silence." When I reached home, I opened a locked drawer, one I had not touched in years. Inside lay an old recorder, a relic from the days before digital files ruled the courts. I had used it to keep private copies of every major meeting, a habit Emily always mocked as old-fashioned. I pressed play. The static hissed before voices emerged, clear, confident, and damning. Her voice. My client's voice. My own too in the background. But what caught my breath was the line she spoke at the end of that meeting months ago. "Once she is gone, we can move everything through my channel. No one will notice." I replayed it. Again. And again. Until the weight of betrayal settled like lead in my chest. The next day I walked back into court, calm and ready. My lawyer whispered, "We have no new evidence." I whispered back, "We do now." The judge looked up as I requested permission to play a recording. Emily's eyes widened, the smirk vanished. The moment her voice filled the room, silence became heavier than any gavel strike. The laughter that had once mocked me ended there, but that was not my victory. It was only the beginning of something much darker, something that would show them all that age is not weakness. Age is patience sharpened into a weapon, and this time I was going to use it. The night after the recording played in court, the city felt different. The air outside the courthouse carried whispers of disbelief. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked through the crowd. Reporters called out my name, microphones pushed close to my face. I ignored them all. I had already said enough. The truth had begun to speak for itself. But truth is never enough on its own. Power still decides how loudly that truth is heard. When I reached home, I poured tea instead of coffee. My hands were steady now. Yet beneath that calm surface, something darker grew. Revenge was no longer a word. It had become a pulse in my veins. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Old lawyer shocks court with secret recording. Some called me a relic who refused to die quietly. Others called me a genius who had waited for the perfect strike. Both were wrong. I was neither. I was simply tired of being erased. At noon, I received a message from the managing partner of my old firm. The message was short. "We need to talk. Come in today." I went. Not because I owed them anything, but because closure often comes disguised as confrontation. When I entered the boardroom, everyone stood except her, Emily. She sat confidently at the head of the table, my old seat. She greeted me with a smile that was far too calm for someone whose voice had just been played in court. "Congratulations," she said. "That was quite the performance yesterday." "Performance," I repeated slowly. "Do not be offended," she continued. "You always had a talent for drama. But you and I both know one recording cannot save you. The case is still open. And I have friends in higher places." I looked around the table. The faces were familiar, but the loyalty was gone. They had chosen survival over integrity. I did not blame them. Fear is a better motivator than respect. "You stole from the company," I said evenly. "You forged my signature. You set me up, but you forgot one thing." Her eyebrow lifted. "And what is that?" "I taught you everything you know," I said, "but not everything I know." The silence that followed was delicious. I could almost hear her heartbeat falter. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "You are done, old woman. You have no power left." That word old struck harder than any insult. It was not about years. It was about relevance, about being forgotten while still alive. I turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind me. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. My lawyer sounded uneasy. "They are filing a counterclaim," she said. "They are accusing you of blackmail. They say you used that recording illegally." I closed my eyes. I should have expected that. In law, the truth is never enough. You must also survive the backlash that follows it. Days turned into weeks. The case expanded. The media twisted every headline. I watched my reputation crumble piece by piece. Friends stopped calling. Former clients avoided me. Even the neighbors began whispering as I passed. It was not just a fall from grace. It was a burial. One evening, while reviewing old files, I came across a letter from my late husband. He had written it years ago during a time when I almost quit law. The paper had yellowed, but his words cut through time. "If the world takes everything from you, let it. What matters is what you refuse to give up. Your integrity." I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside my desk lamp. That single paragraph became my anchor. The next day, I called a retired judge who owed me a favor. His name was Harold. He had once been my fiercest rival before age softened us both into reluctant friends. "I need a special motion approved," I said. "Something that can expose internal firm communications without alerting them." "That will not be easy," Harold said. "You will need a subpoena based on new evidence." "I have something better," I replied. "I have a confession." Harold went silent. "Whose confession?" I hesitated before answering. "Mine." He met me that evening in his private office. I placed before him a sealed envelope. Inside was a statement admitting partial fault, not for fraud but for negligence. It was a calculated risk, a confession that opened legal access to their internal investigation files. "You are walking a dangerous line," Harold warned. "I know," I said, "but the truth hides behind walls built from fear. I need a way in." By the end of that week, my motion was accepted. My opponents celebrated too early, thinking my confession proved weakness. They did not see the door it unlocked. Through court discovery, I gained access to archived emails, thousands of them. Long nights followed, reading line by line, date by date. It was during one of those nights that I found it, an email chain between Emily and a man named Richard, the firm's financial director. The subject line was simple: move the funds before she checks. I leaned back in my chair. My tea had gone cold again. It was all there: the offshore transfers, the secret accounts, the digital trails leading straight to them. She had not only betrayed me, she had stolen millions from the firm. For a moment I felt satisfaction. Then something deeper: pity. She had built her empire on lies, believing herself untouchable. That arrogance would soon be her undoing. The next hearing came fast. The courtroom was packed again. She looked composed, confident, but I saw the faint tremor in her fingers when she noticed the folder in my hands. I began slowly, reading from the printed emails. Each line dropped like a hammer. Her face shifted from defiance to disbelief, then to pale silence. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Are these verified documents?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Verified by the firm's own server logs." Emily's lawyer tried to object, claiming breach of confidentiality, but the judge overruled it. The recording had wounded her. The emails buried her. After the session ended, I walked out quietly. The reporters were louder this time. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "How did you get those files? Was it revenge? Do you plan to sue the firm?" I said nothing. Some truths do not need an audience. That night, I sat by the window watching the city lights shimmer. I thought victory would feel like peace. Instead, it felt like exhaustion. Years of loyalty, decades of work, and it had all come down to this war of paper and pride. But the fight was far from over. I could sense the storm gathering. People like Emily do not surrender, they retaliate, and she did. 2 days later, I received a letter marked urgent. Inside was a formal notice. My assets were frozen pending investigation. She had filed a complaint accusing me of stealing client data. I laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed what I already knew. She was desperate. Desperation is a confession in disguise. I picked up my phone, called my lawyer, and said, "Let her play. She just made her biggest mistake." Outside, thunder rolled through the night sky. It matched the rhythm of my heart. I was no longer defending myself. I was hunting. The fall they planned for me was complete, but they did not realize the fall is where I found solid ground again. And from there, I would rise in a way none of them were prepared for. The morning after my assets were frozen, I sat in silence at the kitchen table. The same cup of tea had gone cold 3 times. I had faced countless adversaries in my career, but this attack was different. It was not about money anymore. It was about erasing me completely, my name, my legacy, my dignity. Outside, the world carried on. Cars moved, people hurried, and sunlight poured through the window as if mocking my stillness. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. Every betrayal leaves behind a shadow, and shadows always point to their source. I began the day with the same precision that had once made me feared in court. I listed every document Emily could possibly use against me. Every file, every client note, every recording. Then I started tracing the leak, the path of information she used to file her new complaint. It did not take long to see the pattern. A week before the first trial, I had shared case updates with a junior associate named Aaron. Young, sharp, eager to impress Emily. He had always asked too many questions, but I dismissed it as enthusiasm. I realized now that he had been her eyes inside my camp. I called him that afternoon. His voice trembled when he answered. "You know why I am calling," I said. There was silence. Then a soft, broken reply. "She promised she would make me partner if I helped her." "She will not," I said quietly. "She will use you and leave you exactly where you are, beneath her." He began to cry. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I have proof," he whispered. "Emails. Messages. She made me forward everything from your account." That sentence was the spark I needed. Within hours, I met Aaron in a cafe far from downtown. He arrived wearing guilt like a heavy coat. His hand shook as he handed me a flash drive. "This has everything," he said. "Please, I just want this to be over." I looked him in the eyes. Nothing is ever over until the truth comes out. That night, I examined the contents of the drive. It was worse than I expected. Internal memos altered, client agreements rewritten, payment trails rerouted. Emily had built an empire of deceit brick by brick, each one polished with arrogance. At midnight, I called Harold again. I have new evidence, I said. He sighed. Do you ever sleep? Sleep is for those who feel safe, I replied. We met the next morning in his chambers. When he saw the documents, he leaned back in disbelief. If this is authentic, she is finished. It is authentic, I said. Aaron confirmed every detail. Harold rubbed his forehead. Then prepare yourself. She will strike harder now. She will not go down quietly. He was right. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, confident, and disturbingly familiar. Stop digging, she said. Emily, I replied, my tone steady. You are too old to play this game, she continued. Let it go before you destroy what little you have left. You already destroyed that, I said. Now I have nothing left to lose. Then you have my pity, she whispered, and the line went dead. I sat in silence, replaying her words. Pity. The word stung. She believed pity was power. She would soon learn it was poison. The next hearing was scheduled for Monday. I spent the weekend preparing with surgical focus. Every statement, every exhibit, every timeline. By Sunday night, I had memorized every document line by line. Age may slow the body, but it sharpens the mind when sharpened by rage. When the day came, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The same reporters filled the benches. Emily sat across from me, her expression cold, confident, untouched by fear. She thought she had buried me again with her new accusations. The judge entered. The bailiff called for order. The trial resumed. Emily's lawyer began his attack immediately, painting me as a manipulative relic who could not accept the end of her career. He spoke of greed, vanity, and desperation. Every word was meant to provoke me. I remained still. Then came my turn. I stood, holding the folder that Aaron had given me. Your Honor, I began. They say I am desperate. Perhaps I am. Desperate not for wealth but for truth. I placed the flash drive on the evidence table. This contains communication between the opposing counsel and my former associate. It reveals deliberate fabrication of evidence and intentional obstruction of justice. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof of authenticity? Yes, Your Honor, I said, and nodded to Harold, who stepped forward as my witness. As the contents played on the screen, the courtroom grew eerily silent. Emily's voice filled the room once more, instructing Aaron to alter files, to mislabel transactions, to leak privileged data. Her composure cracked for the first time. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him. This court will not tolerate deceit, he said sharply. When the playback ended, Emily stood. This is manipulation, she argued, her tone trembling. She is framing me. I met her eyes and spoke quietly. I taught you how to lie on paper, but I never taught you how to lie with your eyes. The judge looked between us, then announced that the court would adjourn for a special review of the evidence. As I stepped outside, cameras flashed again. The reporters shouted questions, but my attention was drawn to one person standing near the steps. Aaron. He avoided my gaze, guilt written across his face. I walked up to him. You did the right thing, I said. He shook his head. No. I did it too late. Late truth is still truth, I replied. That evening I went home and sat beside the window. The city lights reflected on the glass, creating two versions of myself, one weary, one determined. The reflection felt like a metaphor for my life, the woman I was and the one I had become. The phone rang again. It was Harold. The review is complete, he said. They confirmed everything. The judge is furious. He is ordering a full audit of the firm's finances. For a moment I could not speak. Years of betrayal had finally begun to unravel. Harold, I said softly. Thank you. He sighed. Do not thank me yet. This will destroy her, but it will also drag you through the fire. Then let it burn, I replied. That night, as I stared into the darkness, I thought about every person who had laughed at me, every colleague who called me obsolete, every client who turned away. They believed the past fades quietly, but the past never fades. It waits. The storm I had unleashed was only beginning. Emily would fight back with everything she had. She still held power, money, and allies who feared her more than the law. But fear is temporary. Evidence is permanent. And as I closed my eyes, I realized something deeper. The greatest betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from those who once promised loyalty. The shadows around me no longer frightened me. They guided me. Because in those shadows, I had finally found the path to justice. The laughter that started my downfall would soon echo again. But this time it would not be laughter at me. It would be laughter from me. The audit began within 48 hours. The firm that once celebrated Emily's brilliance now feared her name. Investigators moved through offices, seizing computers, freezing accounts, demanding access to private correspondence. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some said she was innocent, that I had orchestrated everything. Others said they always suspected her ambition was too sharp to be clean. I stayed silent. Silence was my strategy now. Let them talk. Let the truth reveal itself without my interference. Meanwhile, I spent my nights revisiting old files, retracing every moment that had led us here. Betrayal has layers, and I wanted to peel back each one until only the core remained. In one folder, I found an old photograph, Emily and me at a legal conference years ago. She had been a student then, radiant, confident, standing beside me like the future itself. I remembered her words that day. "One day I'll make you proud, ma'am." And she had, until she didn't. I stared at the photo for a long time before tearing it in half. The sound was small but final. Days turned into weeks. The court suspended all firm operations pending the audit. Rumors flooded the media. Every headline was a battle cry, each one naming me or her as the villain. Then one morning a letter arrived, an official summons. The State Bar Association was reopening my disciplinary case, not to punish me, but to consider reinstating my license. I sat back stunned. I had not even asked for reinstatement. Someone else had filed the request on my behalf. At the bottom of the page was a name, Harold. He had done it quietly without telling me. That same afternoon I went to see him. He greeted me with his usual dry humor. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "You filed for my reinstatement," I replied. He smiled faintly. "The board asked for my opinion. I told them the truth, that you've done more for justice in these past months than most lawyers do in a lifetime." I sat down across from him. "Do you think they'll grant it?" "They would be fools not to," he said. "But it won't be easy. You've made enemies in high places." "I've always had enemies," I said. "It keeps me sharp." Harold laughed softly. "That it does." When I left his office, the autumn air felt different, cleaner somehow. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet sense of direction. My reputation was still scarred, my finances still frozen, but the tide had turned. That evening I received an email. No subject, no signature, just a single line. "You think you've won? Check your doorstep." I froze. Slowly I walked to the door. A small brown envelope lay on the mat. No postage, no label. I brought it inside, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. A folder appeared. Proof. Inside were photographs, private photographs. Me with clients, me leaving confidential meetings, even me at my husband's grave. Someone had been following me for weeks. At the end of the folder was a video file. Clicked it. The footage showed me entering Harold's office. The timestamp matched the day I gave him Aaron's flash drive. The video had been edited, showing only fragments that made it appear as though I was bribing him. My stomach turned. Emily had escalated. She was no longer fighting in court. She was fighting in the shadows. I called Harold immediately. "They're watching us," I said. "I know," he replied calmly. "I received the same envelope. What do we do?" "Exactly what we've always done," he said. "We stay one step ahead." I ended the call and sat in silence. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, darker. The walls seemed to hum with unseen eyes. I decided to act before fear could grow roots. I gathered every piece of evidence, every document, and stored them in a secure deposit box downtown. If they wanted to destroy me, they would have to find something that no longer existed within my reach. The next morning, the news exploded. Confidential footage leaked in ongoing legal war. The video had gone public. Reporters camped outside my building. They called me corrupt, manipulative, unhinged. I had no words left to defend myself. Any denial would only feed the storm. Harold called again that night. "Do not respond to the media," he said. "Let the noise pass." "But silence looks like guilt," I argued. "Only to those who already decided you're guilty," he said. "You are not fighting for them. You are fighting for truth." His voice steadied me. Days later, the investigation results came in. The court released a preliminary report, confirming that financial fraud had occurred inside the firm. Names were not yet revealed, but the implication was clear. Emily's empire was cracking. Then came the final hearing, the bar's reinstatement review. The room was smaller than the courtroom but somehow heavier with judgment. Faces I had known for decades now stared at me with cautious respect. The chairwoman began. You've been accused, vindicated, and accused again. Why should we trust you to return to practice? I paused before answering. Because I never stopped practicing, I said quietly. Justice isn't confined to a license. It's a choice we make every day, even when no one believes us. The room fell silent. The chairwoman nodded slowly. We'll deliberate. When I walked out, I saw Emily waiting in the hallway. Her eyes were cold, but her confidence had cracks now. You should have quit while you were ahead, she said. I smiled faintly. So should you. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. Then we'll share the same grave, I said. But I promise, mine will be engraved with truth. For the first time, she had no reply. That night, I sat alone once more, staring at the city through rain-streaked glass. The reflection of streetlights shimmered like fading memories. I thought of the girl Emily once was and the woman she became. Ambition without conscience is hunger without end, consumes everything, even itself. As midnight struck, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Tomorrow changes everything. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed, and for the first time in months I felt fear again. Not of losing, but of what victory might cost. The message haunted me through the night. Tomorrow changes everything. I did not sleep. I sat by the window watching the city dim and breathe. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the streets slick and reflective, like mirrors to a life I no longer recognized. At sunrise, there was a knock at my door. 3 times, firm, deliberate. I hesitated before opening it. 2 officers stood there, their faces grim. Ma'am, one of them said, we have a warrant to search your premises. My heart clenched, but I stepped aside without a word. They entered quietly, efficient and polite, but every movement felt like an accusation. They searched drawers, shelves, even the books lining the wall. I watched silently. There was nothing here to find. I had moved every document, every drive. Still, their presence filled the air with guilt I did not deserve. One officer approached, holding a sealed envelope. This was delivered to the precinct this morning, he said. Anonymous source. Contains documents linking you to offshore accounts. I took the envelope. My name was printed on it in bold black ink. When I opened it, I froze. The documents looked legitimate, account statements, wire transfers, signatures. My signatures, only they weren't mine. Someone had forged them again. But this time the forgery was perfect. Even I could barely tell the difference. Are these yours? The officer asked. No, I said firmly. They're fabricated. He nodded, perhaps sympathetically. We'll verify that. When they left, the apartment felt colder. The echo of their footsteps lingered long after the door shut. I called Harold immediately. They forged new evidence, I said. He swore under his breath. Of course they did. She's running out of options. What do we do? You stay still. Let them test it. The truth always survives the microscope, but truth moves slowly. Lies travel faster. By noon, the media had already broken the story. Disgraced lawyer linked to hidden accounts. My phone flooded with calls I did not answer. My name was once again dragged through the mud. Then, unexpectedly, I received another message, this time from Aaron. It read, you need to see this in person. Do not call me. Meet me at the pier at 6 p.m. I hesitated. Could be a trap, but something in my gut told me otherwise. When I arrived at the pier, the wind was sharp, cutting through my coat. Aaron was already there, standing near the railing, looking restless. You shouldn't have come, he said. Then why call me? Because you're the only one who deserves to know. He handed me another flash drive. It's everything. Emails, voice messages, even her instructions to the forger. I recorded one of her calls. I stared at him. Why now? He looked away. Because she turned on me too. Said I was disposable. I thought I'd be safe if I helped her, but she's using me as the scapegoat. I took the drive carefully. This could end it. He shook his head. Or end us both. Before I could respond, he walked away, vanishing into the crowd. That night I played the recording. Her voice again, calm, venomous, precise. Make it identical, Emily said. She can't deny it if it looks perfect. And once the account is in her name, we'll release it to the press. The forger replied, understood. What about your share? I'll move it after she's arrested. I stopped the playback. My chest tightened, but not from fear, from fury. The next morning, I marched into Harold's office. He looked up, startled. You look like hell. I look like the truth, I said, placing the flash drive on his desk. Play it. He did. When the recording ended, he leaned back, stunned. This is enough to ruin her completely. Then let's make it official. That afternoon, we filed a motion to reopen the investigation under new evidence. The judge agreed to an emergency hearing the following day. When Emily entered the courtroom, she no longer looked untouchable. There was tension in her jaw, the faintest hint of unease. I could tell she knew. She always had instincts as sharp as mine. Her lawyer tried to delay the proceedings, claiming fabricated audio, but the judge allowed the playback. The sound of her voice filled the room again. Every word was a confession, wrapped in arrogance. When the audio ended, the silence that followed was suffocating. The judge's expression was unreadable as he spoke. This court will issue a temporary injunction pending full investigation into Ms. Emily Carter's conduct. It was the first time her name appeared beside mine, not as my protégé, but as my adversary. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed us. Microphones, cameras, endless questions. Do you feel vindicated? Will you press charges? Is this revenge? I stopped for a moment and looked directly at one camera. This is not revenge, I said softly. This is accountability. The footage aired that evening across every channel. For the first time, the world saw me not as the fallen lawyer, but as the woman who refused to surrender. But as victory began to take shape, I felt something shift inside me. A hollowness. Because revenge, once complete, does not heal, it empties. And though justice was near, peace was still far. That night, Harold called. You've done it, he said. They've frozen her accounts. She's finished. No, I said quietly. Not yet. He paused. What do you mean? She's still breathing, I replied. He laughed softly. You've always had a flair for drama. Not drama, I said. Closure. Outside, thunder rolled again. And for the first time, I wondered if justice and mercy could ever live in the same heart. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No phone calls, no headlines, no new accusations. It was unsettling, like the calm before a final storm. For months, my life had been a battlefield of noise, cameras, and courtroom lights. Now there was only quiet. I made tea, sat by the window, and let the warmth seep into my hands. The bruises of stress still lingered under my eyes, but there was something new in my reflection. Steadiness. The city outside looked unaware of the chaos that had consumed me. People hurried to work. Buses honked. Children laughed at the corner cafe. For them, it was just another day. For me, it was the edge of everything. By noon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a courier holding a white envelope marked confidential. Inside was a letter from the Bar Association. The board has reviewed the findings of the independent investigation. Your name has been cleared of all charges. Effective immediately, your license to practice law is reinstated. I sat down slowly. The words blurred for a moment, then sharpened again. After everything, the humiliation, the trials, the betrayals, I was back, but it did not feel like victory. Felt like survival. That afternoon, I visited Harold. He was in his office, reading through case files as if time had never touched him. When he saw me, he smiled. So the prodigal returns, he said. I held up the letter. It's official. He leaned back in his chair, eyes softening. You did it. No, I said quietly. We did. He poured us both coffee, though mine went untouched. You'll have offers again. Law firms, interviews, speeches. They'll call you a hero now. I shook my head. Heroes are people who never fall. I just refused to stay down. He nodded slowly. That's the difference between legends and survivors. Before leaving, I asked him, do you ever regret staying in this world? The lies, the manipulation, the endless trials? He smiled faintly. Regret is for those who had a choice. Outside his office, the sky had turned gray. The air smelled of coming rain. I pulled my coat tighter and walked down the street, each step echoing with the memory of everything I had lost and everything I had reclaimed. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "You think it's over? Meet me where it began." No signature, no name, but I knew who it was. Emily. I went anyway. The meeting place was the old courthouse rooftop, the same building where I had once given her her first chance as an intern. The city stretched below, glowing with lights and history. She was already there, standing near the edge, coat fluttering in the wind. Her face was pale, eyes hollow. You won, she said bitterly. No, I replied. The truth won. She laughed. A sound more like a sob. Do you think the truth cares who wins? I took a step closer. It's the only thing that survives when everything else burns. Her gaze flicked toward the city skyline. They've frozen everything I own. I'm ruined. You did that yourself. She turned sharply. You taught me to fight, to never back down. I just learned your lessons too well. I exhaled slowly. You mistook fighting for winning. Her expression shifted, a mix of defiance and despair. You took everything from me. No, I said softly. I took back what was mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind howled between us, carrying fragments of the past. Her laughter in my office, our long nights over case files, the pride I once felt when she succeeded. Finally, she said, "What happens now? That's up to you. I have nothing left. Then you have the freedom to begin again." She looked at me, eyes wet. "Can you forgive me?" I hesitated. Forgiveness was a strange thing, heavy, fragile, undeserved, but I had learned that hate is just another kind of prison. "I already did," I said, "the day I stopped trying to destroy you." She nodded slowly, her shoulders shaking. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away into the darkness. I stayed there for a while, watching the city lights blur through the mist. The rain finally began to fall, soft, cold, cleansing. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not as triumph but as release. When I returned home, the apartment was silent, but not lonely anymore. I poured myself one last cup of tea and opened my old briefcase. Inside were the remnants of my career, pens, notes, faded verdicts. I added the reinstatement letter to the pile, closed the lid, and locked it. It was not an ending. It was a full circle. Months later, I received an invitation from the law school I once lectured at. They wanted me to speak to the graduating class. The topic, integrity in a changing world. I stood at the podium that spring afternoon, looking out at hundreds of young faces, ambitious, eager, unscarred by betrayal. I began simply, "Experience is not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you." As I spoke, I saw her, Emily, sitting quietly in the back row. Her hair was shorter, her expression calmer. When our eyes met, she nodded once. It was not apology, not friendship, just acknowledgement. And somehow that was enough. When the lecture ended, I walked off stage, feeling lighter than I had in years. The sun streamed through the windows, warm and forgiving. For the first time, I realized something simple yet profound. I had not just survived betrayal, I had outlived it. And sometimes that is the greatest justice of all. Months passed, and life began to settle into something resembling peace. The noise of the past years faded into whispers, and the city, once a battlefield, turned into background music again. I started teaching part-time at the university. Standing before students, I saw versions of my younger self, confident, idealistic, unaware of how cruel and beautiful justice could be. Sometimes when I looked at them, I thought of Emily. I wondered where she was, what she was doing, whether she had found a way to forgive herself. One afternoon after class, a student approached me. She was nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Ma'am," she said, "how do you know when you've done the right thing?" I smiled faintly. "You don't," I said. "You just live with the consequences and hope the truth recognizes you someday." She nodded slowly, as if storing the answer for a future she hadn't yet lived. That night, walking home, I passed the courthouse, the same building where my downfall began, and where my resurrection quietly followed. The lights were on, spilling through the tall glass windows. I stopped and looked up. So many battles had been fought there, so many lies dressed as truth. But I realized something. The building hadn't changed, only I had. The next morning, a letter arrived by mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a small piece of folded paper and a check. The paper read, "For the Gray Scholarship Fund. You said once that integrity must be taught, not assumed. Let this help someone learn it. E." I held the letter for a long time. Emily, she had found her own way of redemption. Quietly, anonymously, the only way that truly mattered. I stared at the check. The amount was large, almost absurdly so. Enough to fund an entire year of scholarships for underprivileged law students. For a moment I felt tears rise, but I blinked them back. I had cried enough for one lifetime. That evening, I went to the same rooftop where we had last met. The city stretched below me, vast and indifferent. The wind carried the faint sound of traffic and the distant rhythm of life continuing, with or without me. I whispered softly into the night, "We did it, you foolish girl. We both did." From that day onward, the Gray Scholarship became an annual award, given not to the brightest student, but to the one who showed the greatest courage in standing by the truth, even when it cost them everything. Every year when I handed out that award, I saw in their eyes the same fire I once saw in mine, and in hers. It was a reminder that the cycle of ambition, betrayal, and redemption never truly ends. It just changes faces. Years later, I finally retired from teaching. My hair had turned white, my hands slower, but my mind remained sharp. The law no longer defined me. It had become just one part of the story I carried. Sometimes late at night I'd open that old briefcase again. Inside were mementos of a life lived in the shadow and light of justice, the reinstatement letter, the torn photograph, and now Emily's note. I'd trace the edge of the paper with my fingers and smile. Not every story ends with forgiveness. But sometimes forgiveness is what gives the story an ending. One autumn morning I walked to the courthouse steps for the last time. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of rain and old stone. I stood there, remembering it all, the laughter, the humiliation, the fight, the truth, and then I whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you for underestimating me." Because if they hadn't, I might never have discovered who I really was. The courthouse had fallen silent after the last hearing, but the quiet outside did not follow me home. It lived inside my chest. Each breath came heavy, like my body had been carrying the weight of every lie spoken under oath. At night, the case replayed in fragments, the flicker of the projector, the sound of the gavel, Emily's trembling confession. Each scene returned sharper than it had been in the moment, as though my mind refused to let the story rest. I would wake drenched in sweat, heartbeat racing against the echo of my own name. The doctor called it exhaustion. He handed me pills and told me to rest. I nodded because it was easier than explaining that rest was the one thing I feared. When I closed my eyes, I saw signatures, dotted codes, faces of jurors frozen between disbelief and pity. The days blurred, meals turned cold on the table, the tea kettle screamed itself empty. My hands shook when I reached for files, and sometimes I forgot what I had been searching for. Age had never frightened me before. But that month it did. I felt time pressing its hand on my shoulder, whispering that my body was losing patience with my mind. The headlines changed tone. Reporters no longer mocked. They called me relentless. Some called me obsessed. I did not mind either word. Obsession was the price of truth, and truth had begun to cost me more than sleep. One morning I found blood on the sink after brushing my teeth. A small cut on the gum, harmless, yet it startled me. I realized I had stopped looking after myself entirely. The mirror reflected someone unrecognizable, thinner, paler, eyes sunk deep as though they were searching inward for the part of me that still believed this fight had an end. I spent that day in silence, curtains drawn. The world outside kept spinning, sirens, street vendors, traffic horns, but inside there was only the hum of an overworked mind. I thought about the early years when my husband was still alive. He used to tell me that truth, like iron, demanded forging. It required fire and patience. But if you stayed too long in the flame, even iron melted. That evening I went to his grave. I had not visited in months. The cemetery was quiet, the marble cool under my palm. I spoke softly, though I knew the wind would be my only witness. "I am close," I said, "closer than I ever thought possible. But I do not know what will be left of me when it ends." The wind did not answer, but a single leaf brushed my hand. I took that as enough. When I returned home, I found a letter slipped under the door. No signature. Only 2 lines. "You are not alone. They are afraid. Keep going." I folded it carefully and placed it inside my old case file. Someone somewhere still believed in what I was doing. That reminder steadied me. The next week brought more hearings, more statements, more nights spent hunched over transcripts until dawn. I began to notice how my body protested, the ache in my back, the tremor in my fingers when I held a pen too long. But fear of stopping outweighed pain. If I slowed, the truth would freeze again beneath layers of silence. Harold visited once and found me half asleep at the desk. "You will collapse," he said quietly. "Then I will collapse standing," I replied. He sighed, looking at the stacks of evidence covering every surface. "You have already won more than most ever dare. You can rest now." "Not yet," I said. "Not until the whole machine falls." After he left, I felt something shift inside me. Not doubt, but the ache of knowing he might be right. Every fight has a line where justice turns into obsession. I could feel my foot brushing against that line. The next morning I tried something different. I walked through the city before sunrise, just to remember what life sounded like without sirens or arguments. The streets were empty except for the bakery opening its doors. The smell of warm bread carried through the cold air. For a moment I felt ordinary again. Not a warrior. Not a relic. Just a woman who had forgotten what peace felt like. But even peace could not hold for long. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. They are moving the investigation to federal court. They will come for you again. Not as a defendant but as a witness. Be ready. I stared at the screen, feeling both relief and dread. The truth was no longer mine alone. It had become evidence for others. And evidence always demands sacrifice. That night, as rain tapped against the window, I realized the cost of truth was not measured in money or reputation. It was measured in years shaved off your life, in nights you never truly slept, in moments you could never reclaim. I sat with that thought until dawn broke again. The sky turned silver. My hands ached. My heart felt heavy but alive. I whispered into the quiet. If this is the price, then let me pay it fully. Because once you choose truth, there is no way back to comfort. There is only forward. Through the sleepless nights, through the pain, through the fear that time itself may run out before justice arrives. And even then you keep walking. The letter from Sarah had felt like a lifeline. I had believed she was my anchor in a storm that refused to end. But anchors can rust in silence, and some do not hold when the current turns. It began with a rumor. A whisper in the hallway of the courthouse. Someone had leaked the sealed federal documents to a rival news outlet, details that only Sarah and Harold had access to. First I dismissed it. The press thrived on speculation, but when the story appeared the next morning, every line mirrored the confidential evidence I had handed to her alone. The betrayal hit me like a second trial. The article twisted my motives, painting me not as a fighter for justice, but as a disgraced lawyer using a media spectacle to rebuild a broken reputation. The piece quoted unnamed sources claiming I had offered bribes for testimony. Lies. Perfectly shaped lies. By noon my phone would not stop ringing. Reporters demanded statements. Former colleagues issued public apologies for ever supporting me. The district attorney delayed the next hearing, citing conflicts of interest. Harold arrived at my apartment that evening. His face carried the weight of disappointment mixed with pity. You should not have trusted anyone with those files, he said quietly. I trusted integrity, I replied. He looked away. Integrity is expensive. Most cannot afford it anymore. The silence between us grew unbearable. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning since morning. Was it you? He looked insulted, then tired. After everything we fought together, you still ask that? I have to, I said, because I have learned that betrayal always comes from the ones who say they never would. He left without another word. When the door closed, I realized how truly alone I was. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the stacks of paper that had once meant hope. They now looked like ruins of something I had built too high. The city outside felt distant, the lights like small lies burning across the horizon. The stress finally caught my body. My vision blurred. My hands trembled. I reached for my medication but missed the glass, and it shattered on the floor. I sank to my knees, shards glinting like small verdicts. For the first time, I wondered if it was worth continuing. My mind drifted back to the first day of the trial, the laughter, the humiliation, the anger that had become my fuel. That fire now flickered low. My breath came shallow. I pressed my palms against the floor, whispering to no one, "Enough, I have given enough." The phone rang again. I ignored it. Then again. On the third ring, I answered without looking at the screen. It was Sarah. Her voice trembled. "They got to me," she said. "They threatened to release photos that could ruin my career. I did not sell you out for money. I was scared." I said nothing. Fear. That word again. It had been the reason behind every betrayal in this story, she continued. "I never meant to hurt you. But they wanted the files. They said they would destroy everything if I refused." "Who are they?" I asked. "I do not know," she whispered. "But they are not done with you." The line cut. I sat in silence for a long time. Betrayal no longer shocked me, it only numbed me. But this one was different. Sarah had not betrayed for greed or ambition. She had betrayed for survival. That realization hurt more than anger ever could. By morning, the news cycle had turned cruel again. Pundits debated whether my case was ever about justice or revenge. One commentator called me a cautionary tale about ego and age. I stopped reading after that. The next hearing loomed, but my will to fight was cracking. My health had worsened. The doctors warned me about stress, But the case had become the only thing holding me upright. Without it, I would fall completely. That evening, I stood by the window watching the rain streak down the glass. Each drop slid like a tear down the city's face. I thought of Emily sitting somewhere in custody, probably silent, probably broken. We had both been consumed by the same machine. One that rewarded silence and punished truth. A knock on the door pulled me back. When I opened it, Aaron stood there, soaked from the rain. His eyes looked haunted. "They came for me," he said. "Two men. They said if I testify again, I will disappear. I cannot do this anymore." "You cannot back out now," I said. "You are already part of this." "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am leaving the city tonight." He handed me a sealed envelope. "This is everything I have left. Use it if you still can." Then he turned and walked down the stairs without looking back. Inside the envelope were handwritten notes, dates, passwords, and one torn photograph of Victor Hale standing beside a man whose face I could not fully see. On the back, Aaron had written one line, "He is still alive." The world seemed to tilt. Victor Hale had been declared dead 15 years ago. His name was carved on a grave. But if this note was true, then every assumption I had made was wrong. I tried calling Harold to tell him. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I called his assistant. She said he had checked out of his office unexpectedly that morning. By midnight, the fear I had buried began to claw its way back. What if this had all been orchestrated, not just by Emily, not by the firm, but by Victor himself? A ghost directing the chaos from the shadows. Sleep would not come. I sat through the night, staring at the photograph until dawn painted the sky in dull gray. The idea of continuing felt unbearable. For the first time, I thought about walking away completely, letting the case collapse, letting the system swallow itself. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. No number. Only one line. "If you stop now, his name wins again." I did not know who sent it, but it pulled me back from the edge. I rose, washed my face, and looked in the mirror. The reflection that stared back was fragile, worn, and human. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something flicker. Something that refused to die. The truth had cost me everything. Friends, sleep, health, and faith. But surrendering now would cost me the last thing I had left, meaning. I whispered to my reflection, "You will finish this." And even as my hands shook and my eyes stung from sleeplessness, I began gathering the files again. One by one, I placed them in order. Each paper was a wound. Each wound a reason to keep going. The fight was no longer about vindication. It was about survival of truth itself. And though every part of me wanted to collapse, I knew the breaking point was not the end. It was the moment before the rise. The courthouse air felt like static before a storm. The district attorney had rearranged the witness list without warning, and the defense table looked frayed at the edges. I knew I had one chance left to turn the current, and it would happen in seconds, not hours. Cross-examination is not a sword fight. It is a series of locks opening in the right order. They called Richard to the stand, the firm's financial director. Once confident, now gray at the temples and damp at the collar. He had always preferred numbers to people. Numbers do not judge. Numbers simply exist until someone forces them to speak. He swore in and kept his eyes on the wood rail, not on me. The district attorney began with gentle steps, then handed him to me. The judge nodded. I stood so slowly the room seemed to lean forward. "Mr. Lane," I said, "you managed the firm's high-security floor print devices, correct?" "Yes." "You controlled who could print from those devices?" "Yes." "You also supervised the retention of visitor logs for that floor?" "Yes." "You stated in your affidavit that I never accessed that floor during the month my alleged contract was printed." "That is correct." I let the silence stretch. The gallery held its breath. I lifted a thin folder. "I want to show you 3 items," I said. "First, the printer microdot table mapping device IDs to serial batch codes. Second, the firm's internal device assignment list. Third, the visitor log for a date 2 weeks after you first accused me." Opposing counsel rose. "Foundation." I held up the forensic report. "Chain of custody already admitted." The judge waved me on. "Mr. Lane," I continued, "please read the device ID embedded on the contract that carries my name." He squinted at the enlarged image on the screen. "Device 3A. And who controlled device 3A? He swallowed. "I did." "And who printed from device 3A on the date marked by those dots?" He licked his lips. "The system shows a batch run, not a single user." "So multiple copies were created?" "Yes." I stepped closer to the lectern. "How many copies?" He hesitated. 20 copies of a contract with my name, printed on your device, after you had already accused me of forging it. He shifted. We were validating exhibits. By printing 20 copies from the secure floor? He did not answer. The judge stared over his glasses. I moved to the visitor log. You swore I never accessed that floor that month. Please read the fourth name on the day the 20 copies were printed. He glanced, then looked away. I cannot read that from here. Let me help you. I read it for him. Harold P. Wexler. A murmur rolled through the room. Harold was not at counsel table. He sat behind me a few rows back, face expressionless. Mr. Lane, I said, why would a retired judge visit the secure floor the day you printed 20 copies of a contract that had already been entered into evidence against me? Opposing counsel objected. Speculation. Sustained. Time for the lock to turn. Mr. Lane, I said, did you meet with the district attorney in chambers at 8 this morning? He blinked. No, I lifted a sealed sheet. The judge had authorized its use if needed. Your Honor, may I approach the witness with his signed proffer summary? Opposing counsel lunged to his feet. Objection. Overruled. The judge said, voice flat. Bring it. I placed the sheet before Richard. Please confirm your signature. He stared at it as if it had been written by a stranger. It is mine. Please read the first sentence aloud. His voice was a threat. I admit that I coordinated the printing and movement of documents mislabeled as legacy clearances at the direction of senior partners. The gallery gasped. The sound was not loud. It was deep, like a room remembering how to breathe. Thank you, I said. Now read the second paragraph. He hesitated. The judge leaned forward. Read it. I admit that I informed the board that the contract bearing my name was a placeholder assembled from old sections to create pressure during negotiations. Opposing counsel shouted for a sidebar. The judge shook his head. Sit down. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Mr. Lane, who gave that direction? He stared at the back wall. 2 board members. Name them. He said their names. Those names had appeared in whispers for months. Hearing them land on public record was like hearing a verdict. I kept my pace. Did you meet with another person the week those copies were printed? Yes. Is that person alive today? The room shrank. He looked at me, eyes suddenly wet. Yes. State the name. He closed his eyes. Victor Hale. A low thunder moved through the benches. Someone dropped a pen. The judge struck the gavel once, not to scold, but to anchor the room to time. Mr. Lane, I said, you signed an affidavit years ago that Victor was deceased. The death certificate was a misdirection. Who arranged it? The board. Why? To keep the structure intact. I nodded once. No further questions on that point. I turned, took 2 steps, then pivoted back. The countermove needed one final key. Your Honor, I said, based on the witness's sworn proffer and the testimony today, I move for application of the crime-fraud exception to pierce privilege over communications between the named board members Mr. Lane, Ms. Emily, outside counsel, and any consultant operating under the Koval umbrella. I also request an in-camera review of all attorney-client materials that reference legacy clearance, variance, or escrow bypass. The witness has established a prima facie showing that legal services were used to further a fraud. Opposing counsel stood so quickly his chair skidded. This is an ambush. She is trying to raid privileged files under color of outrage. This is law, the judge said. He turned to me. Do you have authority? Yes. I cited 3 cases in steady cadence. Not a lecture. A sequence. The crime-fraud gate, the burden standard, the scope of review when counsel is used as a conduit. The judge had read them all. I could see it in his eyes. The motion is granted, he said. Immediate production to chambers. Any attempt to delete or alter will trigger contempt and referral. The room released a sound that was not applause and not panic. It was the rust of a broken lock falling away from a door that had waited for years. I faced Richard again. One more matter. On the day Harold visited the secure floor, did you provide him with any document? Yes. What document? A letter from Victor. Behind me, Harold shifted. I did not turn. Not yet. Did that letter discuss me? Yes. What did it say? It warned that you needed to be isolated and publicly discredited if you ever questioned the clearance channel. Why involve Harold? Because Victor believed you respected him. I let that land. Then I looked at Harold. Do you have that letter? He stood slowly, stepped to the aisle and raised a plain envelope. His face showed years I had never seen on him. I do. he said. The judge called him forward. He handed the letter to the clerk with hands that did not shake. The clerk read silently, then passed it to the judge. The judge's jaw tightened by a fraction. He nodded to me. "Mark it," I said, "and publish." The screen filled with Victor's language. Cold. Efficient. No insult. Only instructions. Isolate. Confuse. Print 20. Exploit the escrow clause to trap later filings. Treat legacy clearance as holy. If challenged, remove originals. The audience read in silence. Reputations did not collapse with a crash. They sagged under the weight of their own design. The board members at the back row stood to leave and met a wall of deputies. I returned to Richard. "Mr. Lane, is there any doubt in your mind that the contract used to accuse me was constructed as a weapon, then backfilled through your devices to create false history?" "No doubt." "Is there any doubt that the people who created that weapon are the same people whose counsel now claims privilege to hide the forge?" "No doubt." No further questions. The judge looked at the clock and then at the jury. "We will take 15 minutes. I sat. My hands were steady in a way they had not been in months. The countermove had not been showmanship. It was pressure in the right place, applied at the right time with the right rule. During recess, Harold approached. For a long moment we did not speak. "I should have told you," he said at last. "You should have," I replied. "They blackmailed me with a mistake I made years ago. I thought time had buried it. It had not." I looked at him and felt the ache of old trust cracking without shattering. "Bring the rest," I said. "Everything he sent you. Everything you hid to protect me. And everything you hid to protect yourself." He nodded once and returned to his seat. When the court reconvened, the district attorney moved for immediate detention of the two named board members pending the crime fraud review. The judge signed the orders without ceremony. Deputies moved, faces drained. The gallery felt colder. As the bailiffs escorted them out, one board member turned toward me, eyes full of something that looked like disbelief wearing hatred as a mask. He mouthed a single word I could read easily. "Old." I rose, put my palms on the table and met his gaze. Age had been the joke they told each other to feel safe. The room no longer found it funny. Outside, the corridor hummed with voices rushing to rewrite what they had just witnessed. I did not linger. I stepped into the light that spilled through the high windows and let it warm my face. The tide had turned not with rage, not with volume, but with a maneuver that asked the law to look at itself and refused to serve a lie.